Human body parts clogged up the sewer system, and highly decomposed corpses were unearthed by him to satisfy his lust. Afterward, he would dress up the bodies, have them accompany him to watch movies, drink, and chat. Over the course of 5 years, at least 16 young men were brutally murdered by him. Some were turned into barbecue for devouring, while others were chopped up and flushed down the toilet. Some were buried deep underground, only to be dug up later to continue satisfying his desires. On February 4, 1983, Dennis Andrew Nilsen, a tenant at 23 Cranley Gardens in North London, discovered that the apartment's pipes were blocked. Subsequently, Michael Catren, an inspector from the drainage company, came to the door and, during the investigation, extracted some minced meat from the pipes. Catren was very puzzled by the minced meat, and Nilsen jokingly said, "Someone must have flushed KFC fried chicken into the pipe." Due to the lack of complete tools, Catren had to temporarily return, half believing and half doubting, planning to come back the next day for inspection. The next day, as the inspection deepened and expanded, Catren found the astonishing truth behind the pipe blockage, with more minced bones and meat pulp inside. Since these residues were all in the pipes near apartment 23, Nilsen became the prime suspect. On the evening of February 9th, detectives arrived at 23 Cranley Gardens. In the pipes near this apartment, they discovered an even more chilling fact. These minced bones and meat were all human. Because a piece of meat came from a human neck, with obvious strangulation marks on it. And the culprit Nilsen was very shocked. When the police questioned him about why the pipe was blocked by human remains, Nilsen slowly said, "This is a long story. Take me back to the police station and I will tell you what happened." Back at the police station, Nilsen calmly told the police that they would find more severed limbs in the living room's tea cabinet and the bathroom's drawer. Nilsen listed his murders in a shopping list-like manner, describing his crimes expressionlessly. Nilsen confessed that he was a serial killer, and at 23 Cranley Gardens alone, he killed 3 people and dismembered their bodies. He buried the victims' bodies under the floor, then dug them up, sat next to the corpses to watch TV, burned some limbs in the backyard, and cut the rest into pieces, flushing them down the toilet. Nilsen was born in Fraserburgh, Scotland in 1945. His father was a soldier and his mother was the daughter of a local fisherman. However, his father had no sense of family responsibility and was always drunk and hanging out outside. His mother could no longer bear it and divorced her husband. Their marriage lasted 6 years, leaving behind 3 children, and after the divorce, the role of the father was taken over by the grandfather. As a child, Nilsen was closest to his grandfather. When his grandfather went to sea, he eagerly waited at the port. The first 5 years of his life were the happiest of his life, and his grandfather was the person he admired the most. On October 31st, 1951, it was Halloween, and Nilsen was about to turn 6 years old in a month. But his grandfather died of a heart attack on his fishing boat in the North Sea. This brought a heavy blow to Nilsen's childhood, and worse was to come. His grandfather's body was brought home for burial. Because Nilsen's mother was a devout and rigid Catholic. According to Catholic funeral etiquette, relatives and friends should say goodbye to the deceased before burial. Under his mother's insistence, Nilsen, who was not yet 6 years old, saw his grandfather's body and witnessed the funeral farewell ceremony. His mother just told Nilsen that his grandfather was sleeping. The sleeping face of his grandfather, the expression of sorrow and tears from his family, and the despair of waiting for a loved one who would never come, all left an indelible mark on Nilsen's young heart. From then on, Nilsen became sensitive, quiet, introverted, and self-enclosed. As Nilsen grew up, he discovered that his sexual orientation was male, and the pressure on his life grew greater and greater. After all, in those days, homosexuality was still a term full of discrimination. Nilsen tried to hide himself, but his brother found out. Not only did his brother not understand him, but he also widely publicized the matter. Nilsen was ridiculed and looked at as if he were a monster, and he was still just an innocent elementary school student. Nilsen dropped out of school at the age of 15 and joined the army. In the army, Nilsen began to use alcohol to escape his loneliness, although he deliberately kept his distance from others. During his service, Nilsen got his own single room, and he often faced the mirror, trying not to let his face reflect in the mirror. Then he pretended to be unconscious and imagined himself playing another person, helping another role to masturbate, to indulge in sexual fantasies. In the last few months of his service, Nilsen met a man named Brian Masters, and they developed a very close relationship. Nilsen thought he had fallen in love and began to pursue Masters. But Masters was not homosexual, so to avoid Nilsen, he had someone tell Nilsen he had an accident and died on his way home. This was a huge blow to Nilsen, so he destroyed the video he had shot, which was originally intended for Masters. During his service, Nilsen was stationed in places like Aden, Cyprus, and Berlin. Nilsen chose the logistics and catering department, learned cooking skills, and learned how to use various knives, kitchen utensils, and other tools. This seems to explain why Nilsen became an expert in dismembering bodies. In 1972, Nilsen was discharged from the army, ending his military career. He not only had a lot of sexual contact with men, boys, and prostitutes, but also conceived bizarre fantasies of corpses, death, and love intertwined in his mind. In order to find the camaraderie he had experienced in the army, Nilsen signed up for the London police. After passing a 16-week training, Nilsen was assigned to the Willesden Green police station. But Nilsen soon found that police life was terrible, completely different from the camaraderie he imagined in the army. Nilsen only worked in the police station for a year and resigned in December 1973. The following year, 1974, Nilsen's daily life was to linger in those gay bars. One night, Nilsen met one of the most romantic objects of his life, David Gallican. The two quickly fell in love and lived together. Nilsen, who tried to establish an intimate relationship, suggested that the two settle down. The couple started looking for an apartment in London, and they found 195 Melrose Avenue. This apartment has a garden, and there is space under the floor of the room, which later became the place where Nilsen dismembered and hid the bodies. Nilsen and Gallican happily spent 2 years here, and they also bought a dog. However, as Gallican gradually lost interest in Nilsen, their relationship eventually broke down. The long-lost fantasy of death reappeared in Nilsen's mind, making him ecstatic as if he saw his grandfather in the coffin again. Loneliness, despair, hangovers, sleep, death. Nilsen had brief and superficial relationships with many men, all of which ended without a trace, which plunged Nilsen into endless loneliness and self-blame, even doubting his ability to establish an intimate relationship. Later, Nilsen began to write his memoirs in prison, writing, "Those people did not reduce my inner loneliness. I have been looking for someone who will never leave." What kind of person will never leave? Nilsen's answer is that the body will never leave. He doesn't mind the smell of death, and feels that only with the body will he not feel lonely, just like the feeling when he saw his grandfather sleeping. For this reason, Nilsen picked up men full of hormones in bars or on the street, taking the initiative to propose to have a drink together. Nilsen's memoirs recorded that most of the people he killed, I don't know their names, don't ask where they come from, don't want to know what they do, and don't remember what they look like. What I can remember is his intimacy with the body. At the end of 1978, Nilsen met a young man in a bar and then invited the man to his home, 195 Melrose Avenue in London. They continued to drink, and later the two crawled into bed to sleep. Nilsen got up in the evening, realizing that his new friend was about to leave. Nilsen patted the man's body. Nilsen's heart was beating very hard, and he was sweating all over. Nilsen looked at the young man, and then saw the pile of clothes between them. He found a tie, so Nilsen got up and picked up the tie. "I crawled on top of him, then stuffed the tie under his neck," Nilsen wrote. "I immediately sat on him and tightened the tie with all my strength. His body immediately came to life, and we fought from the bed to the ground." Nilsen pulled the tie tightly, and the young man kept kicking on the carpet until he reached the wall. Then he lost consciousness and stopped resisting. Nilsen let out a sigh of relief, but he realized that the man was not dead, just unconscious. So Nilsen ran to the kitchen and filled a plastic bucket with water. Nilsen intended to drown him, placed the young man on a stool, and then pressed his head into the bucket of water. The young man did not resist, even though the splashing water soaked the carpet. A few minutes later, Nilsen recalled that after the bubbles stopped coming up, he lifted the young man's head. As the water droplets trickled down from his brown hair, Nilsen realized that the young man was dead, but he couldn't remember the man's name. Nilsen was trembling, almost unable to realize what he had done and the consequences he would face. After making a cup of coffee and smoking a few cigarettes, Nilsen untied the tie from the body and took a good look at the deceased young man. Nilsen then covered the window with a towel and carried the body on his shoulder, taking it into the bathroom. Nilsen gently placed the body in the bathtub, turned on the water, and began to wash the young man's hair. His hair was very soft and fluffy, Nilsen said, as he tried to get the body out of the bathtub, dried it, and carried it to another room to lay it on the bed. Nilsen gently touched the body, which still retained warmth and freshness, but Nilsen noticed that the lips of the body began to discolor. After covering the body with a sheet, he pondered. "I knew this was the beginning of the end of my life," Nilsen wrote. "I was surprised to find that I had a new roommate on the avenue of death, although he was not a complete roommate." Compared to people's fear of corpses, Nilsen found a certain beauty in the body. Nilsen didn't know why he killed the young man. He just didn't want him to leave. He had spent several lonely Christmases alone, and he didn't want to go through the same New Year again, but now he had someone to accompany him. Later, Nilsen went to the hardware store and bought an electric knife and a large pot, but he couldn't cut up the body like that. He first dressed the body in new underwear, then took a bath with the corpse. Afterward, Nilsen decided to have sexual relations with the body. He put the body on the bed, but he couldn't feel the sustained pleasure, so he pushed the body off the bed, covered it with curtains, and went to sleep. After waking up, Nilsen made dinner, ate while watching TV, and the body still lay on the ground not far away. Finally, Nilsen knew he needed to do something. He opened the wooden floor and tried to push the body underground, but the body was very stiff and hard to stuff in, so he put the body against the wall, deciding to wait until the body softened before shoving it under the floor. A week later, Nilsen was very curious about the condition of the body, so he lifted the carpet again, and the body had become a mummy. Then Nilsen carried the mummy to the bathroom to bathe it. After washing, Nilsen did not change the water. He took a bath with the same water as the mummy, then carried the mummy back to the living room and knelt down, masturbating on the stomach of the corpse. Afterward, Nilsen put the body under the floor again. Finally, the body stayed underground for 7.5 months until Nilsen took it outside to burn it. He added rubber during the cremation process to cover the smell of burning, and in the end, Nilsen scattered the ashes on the ground. The identity of the young man could never be identified. In 1981, Nilsen killed a total of 12 people in his apartment, and only 4 people were identified: Kenneth Ockenden, Martini Duffy, Billy Sutherland, and Malcolm Barlow. Most of these people were unemployed vagrants or homeless people who thought Nilsen could provide them with a job. Some were homosexuals, and a small part were male prostitutes. The killings only stopped after Nilsen was discovered. The formal interrogation by the police began on February 11th, lasting a week with a total of 30 hours. During the interrogation, Nilsen cooperated very much, telling the police his methods of killing and helping the police identify the fragments of the victims' bodies without any threat. Nilsen seemed to have a conscience, taking the police interrogation very seriously, not begging for sympathy, but Nilsen did not regret what he had done at all. The police training Nilsen had received also helped the interrogators find evidence more conveniently, and Nilsen told them what kind of evidence the prosecution needed to prosecute him. Thanks to Nilsen's cooperation, the police were able to find different body fragments and reassemble the victims' bodies. Each time a victim's identity was confirmed, the police could add another charge of murder. Nilsen also took the police to 195 Melrose Avenue to point out where he had buried the bodies and where he had burned the bodies. A police officer once described Nilsen as a super pervert, a complete murderer. But Nilsen retorted, "I just wanted to make a friend. I hope everything will make me more cheerful." Later, Nilsen wrote everything he had done in the form of a memoir and handed it over to a young writer named Brian Masters, who organized Nilsen's scattered memoirs and published them. Masters said, "Nilsen remembers his first murder very clearly, and I believe this indicates Nilsen's self-reflection, and this is also a rare detailed case in the history of crime." After narrating his confession, Nilsen was transferred to Brixton Prison, waiting for his final judgment. During the waiting period for the court trial, Nilsen decided to give up the right to legal aid, but they did not accept it and still assigned Ronald Moss as Nilsen's lawyer. A few days before the trial, Nilsen immediately fired Ronald Moss and hired Ralph Hans. The defense lawyer defined Nilsen as a psychopath to reduce the punishment, while the other lawyer, Evan Lawrence, accused Nilsen of murder. One night during the trial, Nilsen said, "I will sentence myself to a heavy punishment, heavier than any court will sentence." Later, Nilsen was charged with 6 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. Alan Green was the prosecutor. He believed that Nilsen knew exactly what he was doing when he killed, which means Nilsen killed with consciousness or normal consciousness, so he should be found guilty. Green described the scene on the morning of Nilsen's arrest, but the jury paid more attention to those disgusting photos of the bodies, and then Green brought up the attempted murder cases to divert the jury's attention. Nilsen's confession was read very carefully by the police in court, but just reading these materials took 4 hours. Then they displayed the evidence one by one, including the large pot for boiling bodies, the cutting board for cutting bodies, and a set of knives. The defense witness, Dr. James McGeechan, listed many types of pathological personalities to the court, and he claimed that Nilsen was also a victim. He described how Nilsen was tormented by various problems and relationships in life, as well as Nilsen's childhood experiences. So he believed that some legal responsibility should be reduced. Psychiatrists described that most of Nilsen's sexual stimulation was generated by the unconscious body, and at the same time, Nilsen was also arrogant, frivolous, and often got drunk. There was a significant weakening in the sensory recognition of the same kind, so Nilsen didn't know why he killed people and couldn't realize that what he did was harmful to morality and violated the law. The second psychiatrist, Dr. Patrick Gwillim, diagnosed Nilsen as a borderline personality, pretending to be his normal personality, which is a pathological personality. Nilsen often indulged himself and isolated himself in his own world, which means Nilsen would occasionally have a split personality when his world conflicted with the outside world, but Nilsen could control himself most of the time, so he believed that Nilsen's crime was not intentional or premeditated. The psychologist with the opposing view, Dr. Paul Bowden, spent 14 hours with Nilsen, more than any other defense scholar. He believed that the other scholars' testimonies were not accurate, and he thought Nilsen was fully capable of controlling his behavior. He felt that Nilsen's case was very special, and Nilsen should be a psychopath, not mentally confused, but he did not clearly explain his different views from other scholars. During the final discussion, the court told the jury to ignore those medical terms and focus more on whether Nilsen's source of sin was a psychopath. The jury decided to adjourn on November 3rd, Tuesday. At 11:25 a.m. the next day, the court announced that the majority of the jury had reached an agreement, with only 2 people having different opinions on the murder case of Norbert. At 4:25 p.m. they announced, "Nilsen, guilty." Nilsen had originally thought that he would soon be released on bail. However, in 1994, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security re-evaluated the case and decided to specifically cancel the bail clause in this case. As a result, Nilsen lived in constant fear in prison every day, as many criminals believed that Nilsen was not even human. It wasn't until May 12, 2018, that Nilsen, at the age of 72, died naturally in prison.